which is the meaning of Parakletos. And that's the name of the Prophet Muhammad, is Muhammad al-Shafi', Muhammad the intercessor.
That Shabir presented, that is Muhammad as the Parakletos, the Paraclete. The majority of Islamic apologists assert that the text of John's Gospel has been corrupted. So at the current reading, Parakletos is supposed to be another term, normally Periklutos. There is, of course, no evidence of such an alteration, and I am very thankful that Shabir does not make that presentation, despite the fact that it has become extremely popularized by people like Ahmed Deedat. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever of such a corruption. In fact, it is particularly problematic for Muslims to attempt to allege textual corruption in John, for it is the earliest attested book in the New Testament. This is true whether one tries to allege textual corruption, such as whether Paraclete was a different word, or what we just heard, some kind of theoretical compilation of the text, later editors, so on and so forth. Remember, the Gospel of John is the earliest attested, no later than AD 125 in manuscript P52, which you're seeing on the screen right now. And in fact, we may have manuscripts that even go earlier than that, and they are of the Gospel of John. There is no question as to the identity of the Comforter in the Gospel of John. There is a consistent theme of identifying the Comforter as the Holy Spirit, the one who will take Jesus' place when he ascends back to the Father. Though the majority of the information about the Comforter is found in John 14 through 16, elsewhere in John, the Spirit plays a very vital role. That is why Shabir Ali attempts to cut the Gospel into pieces. You just heard him using Raymond Brown, and you have these earlier texts and later texts and redactors and form criticism and all these things. There is not a single shred of documented evidence anywhere in the world supports any of those theories, not a one. And I remind you, there's all sorts of theories like that about the Quran too. All the Orientalists say, well, this was added here and this was added there, and you Muslims say, show us some evidence. Well, that's what I'm going to be saying this evening. Show us some evidence. There is no physical evidence that John 15 through 17 is to be separated from the rest of the Gospel of John. Speculative theories abound in liberal scholarship about how John wrote the Gospel, just as speculative theories abound in Oriental scholarship about how the Quran was written. Multiple authors, redactions and surahs, especially al-Baqarah, etc. But speculation without physical evidence is not solid grounds for debate. The gospel witness to the Paraclete is clear. John 13 through 17 is a consistent whole, providing the final ministry of Jesus to his disciples. John 14 through 17 is thoroughly Trinitarian, speaking easily of the divine roles of Father, Son, and Spirit in the divine economy of salvation. After encouraging prayer to himself, John 14:14, Jesus speaks of another comforter of the same kind as himself in John 14:16. The Paraclete will be with believers forever, according to John 14:16. The world cannot receive the Paraclete because it cannot see him or know him, John 14:17 says. The same verse tells us the Paraclete is the Spirit of truth, and the Paraclete dwells with and in believers. This is why you have to try to cut John 16 away from John 14. It's the only way you can come up with an identification of Muhammad in that way. The Paraclete is the Holy Spirit, John 14:26. I'll address the textual variant in a moment. The Paraclete teaches all things and brings to remembrance what Jesus said. And given how few words of Jesus are in the Quran, that doesn't fit at all, does it? The Paraclete proceeds from the Father, John 15:26. The Paraclete testifies of Jesus, not of himself. The Paraclete is sent by Jesus. If the Paraclete's Muhammad, does Jesus send prophets? The Paraclete convicts the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. The Paraclete guides disciples into all truth. The Paraclete does not speak on his own authority, but reveals what is to come. And the Paraclete glorifies Jesus, John 16:14. Now, regarding Shabir's entire presentation on this subject, Raymond Brown's theory, I didn't drag the 2-volume set across the ocean as he did. Well, I'll tell you, that's fun to get through TSA screening. But theories regarding how a writer wrote his work are speculative. Many others disagree. Brown himself does not take his own theory to the length Shabir Ali does. He certainly doesn't. Not a single person he quoted comes to conclusions that he did. And he interprets the Paraclete as the Holy Spirit, not Muhammad. It is simply unfair to say Christian scholars have concluded, Christian scholars have shown. No. Men who call themselves Christians have speculated about something they haven't a shred of evidence to substantiate. They don't have any hard evidence. They can go, well, we think that there was an evolutionary process that went into creating this book, and here's how it might have happened. And you can get published that way, but that's not the stuff of solid scholarship in debate. Why doesn't Shabir note F.F. Bruce or Leon Morris or any of the other great believing conservative Christian scholars who have dealt with the Gospel of John, who present no inkling of Brown's speculative reconstructions of the writing of the text? It should likewise be noted, this kind of modern redactional, critical, speculative scholarship was obviously unknown in the days of Muhammad. But remember, the Quran says, whom they find mentioned in their own scriptures in the law and the gospel. Who in Muhammad's day would find mentioned in their scriptures Muhammad when one needs Raymond Brown's redactional speculations to find him? Now, regarding John 14:26 and the phrase Hade parakletos ta pneuma ta hagion, what you just heard presented to you, C.K. Barrett mentions that the Sinaitic Syriac does not have the phrase ta hagion. What you didn't have mentioned to you was that every single Greek manuscript on God's green earth of John chapter 14 does have ta hagion. All Latin manuscripts contain the phrase. All other translations into other languages contain the phrase. The Sinaitic Syriac is alone here. Now, may I simply ask the Muslims in the audience, would you allow me to come up with a theory about Surah 2 in which I found a single translation of the Quran from, say, 250 years after Muhammad into a different language, and it has a different reading from every single Arabic Quran known in the world? This translation stands alone, yet I insist upon overthrowing all Arabic manuscripts of the Quran based upon this single foreign language translation. Would you allow me to get away with that kind of disruption of the text of the Quran? That's what you're being asked to do right now. One translation, one version. The rest of the Syriac has it. One single translation. We have earlier manuscripts which contain the phrase, and yet you had it presented to you as, oh, well look at this. Think about that for just a moment. Hence, when the text is allowed to speak for itself, and context is allowed to stand, the identity of the parakletos is easily determined. There is no historical, contextual, linguistic, textual, critical, or theological reason to find in the Paraclete a reference to Muhammad, and the context itself precludes any such application by its consistent teaching that the Paraclete dwells within us. And these were promises to the disciples, not someone 600 years later. If Jesus said these words, as the scriptures say he did, then he was saying to them, he will dwell in you. How can that be 600 years later?